Welcome to Stories for Sleep. I'm Simon, your host for the night. Let's get you settled in for a peaceful slumber by taking a moment to relax. Close your eyes and let yourself sink into the comfort of your bed. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly, letting go of any tension in your body. Tonight, we'll embark on a journey full of unexpected twists and turns. Close your eyes and let your imagination take you on a journey to the charming city of Albufeira in Portugal. In this story, you'll encounter a group of sinister pigeons who have a wicked plan to make tourists' holidays a misery. As you drift off to sleep, let the world of this story transport you to a place of peace and tranquility, knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness can make a big difference. The beautiful Portuguese city of Albufeira was known for its picturesque beaches, colorful buildings, and friendly locals. However, hidden amidst the bustling streets and lively crowds lived a group of pigeons that were not like the others. These evil pigeons were not the typical gray, plump birds that were commonly seen pecking at breadcrumbs on the pavement. They were dark, with feathers as black as the night sky. Their beady red eyes were unnerving, and their sharp, pointed beaks looked like weapons. They were a small but cunning group of birds, with a sinister plan to make the lives of tourists visiting Portugal miserable. They had noticed that every summer, crowds of tourists would flock to the city, eager to soak up the sun, sand, and sea. The evil pigeons saw this as an opportunity to cause chaos and wreak havoc. They had carefully planned their strategy to make sure that tourists would leave the city feeling annoyed and frustrated. Their plan was simple, but effective. They would start by stealing the food of the tourists. They would swoop down from the sky and snatch sandwiches, ice creams, and other treats right out of the tourists' hands. They would also fly into restaurants and cafes, stealing food from plates and tables. The evil pigeons would then move on to stealing other items, like hats, sunglasses, and even bags. They would fly low over the heads of the tourists and snatch these items before quickly flying away, leaving the tourists stunned and confused. But their plan didn't stop there. The evil pigeons would also make sure that the tourists didn't get a good night's sleep. They would gather outside the windows of the hotels where the tourists were staying, cooing and making loud noises all night long. They would fly in circles, flapping their wings and making it impossible for the tourists to get any rest. The tourists soon started to realize that something was not right. They would wake up tired and grumpy, with no energy to explore the beautiful sights that Albufeira had to offer. The evil pigeons were succeeding in their plan to make the lives of tourists miserable. But little did they know that their reign of terror would soon come to an end. A young boy named Pedro had been watching the evil pigeons closely and had come up with a plan to stop them. Pedro was a curious and observant boy who loved spending time outdoors. He would often sit by the beach, watching the waves crash onto the shore while keeping a keen eye on the local bird population. He had a particular fascination with pigeons, finding their unique personalities and behaviors endlessly intriguing. It wasn't long before Pedro began to notice that some of the pigeons in Albufeira were different from the others. He had seen them around town, lurking in the shadows and watching the tourists with a keen interest. Their dark feathers and red eyes stood out amongst the lighter-colored birds, and Pedro couldn't help but wonder what made them so different. As he continued to observe the pigeons, Pedro began to notice a pattern in their behavior. They seemed to be working together in a way that was unusual for pigeons. They would gather in groups, flying in coordinated patterns and communicating with each other in a way that was almost human-like. Pedro's curiosity led him to follow the pigeons around the city, keeping a safe distance so as not to alert them to his presence. He watched as they swooped down from the sky to steal food from unsuspecting tourists, their sharp beaks making quick work of sandwiches, chips, and even whole pieces of fruit. But it wasn't just the stealing of food that caught Pedro's attention. The evil pigeons seemed to take pleasure in causing chaos and disrupting the peaceful holiday atmosphere. They would swoop down low over the heads of tourists, flapping their wings and squawking loudly, causing them to duck and cover in fear. Pedro knew that he needed to do something to stop the evil pigeons from ruining the holidays of countless tourists. He spent hours researching pigeon behavior and learning about different techniques for bird deterrence. Pedro's determination to put an end to the evil pigeons' reign of terror did not falter. He knew he needed a plan that would work, something that would deter the birds from bothering the tourists. So he set out on a mission to find a solution. Pedro tried everything he could think of, from throwing stones to clapping loudly, but nothing seemed to work. The evil pigeons were relentless, and they continued to swoop down on tourists, making their holidays miserable. Then, one day, while watching the pigeons from a distance, Pedro had an idea. He noticed that the birds seemed to be attracted to food, especially when it was easily accessible. So, he decided to use this to his advantage. Pedro set up a feeding station far away from the tourist areas, in a quiet corner of the city where the evil pigeons could feast undisturbed. He filled the station with seeds, breadcrumbs, and other pigeon-friendly treats, and waited patiently to see if the plan would work. At first, the evil pigeons were skeptical. They had grown used to stealing food from the tourists and were wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. But after a few days of watching from a distance, they slowly began to approach the feeding station. Pedro was overjoyed when he saw the first pigeon take a bite of the food he had left out. He knew that he had to be patient and persistent, but he was confident that his plan would work. Over the next few days, more and more pigeons began to visit the feeding station, and Pedro started to notice a difference in their behavior. They seemed less aggressive and less interested in bothering the tourists, instead spending most of their time at the feeding station. As Pedro watched the evil pigeons gathered around the feeding station, he started to notice something that he had never seen before. The birds were no longer the menacing creatures that he had come to despise. Instead, they seemed almost gentle as they pecked away at the food that he had provided for them. Pedro realized that he had been too quick to judge the birds, labeling them as evil simply because of their behavior towards the tourists. He had failed to consider the fact that they were just trying to survive, like every other living being. As he watched the pigeons, Pedro started to feel a deep sense of compassion for them. He knew that these birds had to contend with a tough environment, where food was scarce and predators were numerous. He realized that the evil pigeons were just trying to survive the only way they knew how. Pedro started to see the birds in a different light. He saw their beauty, their resilience, and their ability to adapt to difficult circumstances. He knew that these were traits that he could learn from and that he could use to make a difference in the world around him. In that moment, Pedro made a vow to help not just the pigeons, but all living creatures that he encountered. He knew that it was possible to make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. From that day on, Pedro became a champion of the environment, working tirelessly to protect the natural world and the creatures that lived within it. He inspired others to do the same, and soon, the city of Albufeira became known as a haven for all living beings. Pedro's compassion and understanding had not only saved the tourists from the evil pigeons, but it also opened his eyes to the beauty and resilience of nature. He knew that if he could change his perspective and see the world in a different light, then anyone could. As Pedro continued his mission to protect the environment and all living creatures, he found himself faced with new challenges and adventures. He discovered new ways to help animals, from setting up birdhouses to creating butterfly gardens, and even organizing a beach cleanup to keep the coastline free of plastic waste. One day, as Pedro was walking through the streets of Albufeira, he spotted a group of tourists taking photos of a flock of pigeons perched on a statue. He couldn't help but smile as he watched the birds cooing and flapping their wings. Pedro approached the tourists and struck up a conversation, telling them about his own encounter with the evil pigeons and how he had come to see them in a different light. The tourists were amazed by Pedro's story and impressed by his dedication to protecting the environment. Suddenly, one of the pigeons swooped down and landed on Pedro's shoulder, causing the tourists to gasp in surprise. Pedro just laughed and smiled. "Looks like they're not so evil after all," he said, scratching the bird's head. And so, Pedro's love and compassion for all living creatures had not only saved the tourists from the wrath of the evil pigeons, but had also inspired a new generation of environmentalists to see the world in a different light, one filled with kindness and understanding.